Hi ladies and gentlemen, and Curse of the Polish Geek is back now with top 10 best movies of 2024, because just as I did first my top 10 worst movies of 2024, now I did top 10 best, which I think is obviously a much better and positive list. And I have to say, there were quite a few good movies actually in 2024. In fact, I'm gonna say, for me actually, 2024 was better than last year, 2023. That's right, I actually think that I've enjoyed plenty of the movies in 2024 more than I did movies from last year. I mean, sure, last year we got Tetris, Suzume, Oppenheimer. I mean, we certainly did got some superb movies last year, but overall, I actually think that some of my favorite movies, we actually were better this year, actually, and this list will show that. But of course, before you get to your list, you gotta have your honorable mentions. But before we get to honorable mentions, first I will say why one movie is not on this list, and even though it almost made at the very least honorable mentions, but no, it's not even there. And that movie is Conclave, and this is a perfect example of how one single scene can basically ruin the entire movie, because Conclave had lots of things to love about it. Like, I love how all the detailed it was and how it was so showed up how Conclave really looks like without the prayers. Unfortunately, I wish there were also more prayers, but that's neither here nor there. But I also loved how richly detailed everything was, and to show how real election of the Pope looks like and all that. And I did like the characters, but unfortunately it was completely ruined by a dumb, completely pointless twist at the very end that was, some Catholics even go as far as to say it was blasphemous, and I see where they are coming from. I'm Catholic myself, I see where they are coming from. Some say it was outright blasphemous, while others say it was like unnecessary and pointless at best. Whatever the camp you fall in, either way, this is a perfect example of how one single thing at the very end can completely ruin the movie, which is a real shame. Well, I mean, if the ending was how I was saying it should be, which is basically the newly elected Pope addressing the crowd of faithful Catholics in Vatican, which would be a much better ending, then this movie would have a very potential to be high on this list. But because of that completely pointless, unnecessary twist, it's not even in honorable mentions. But so now, let's get on to actual honorable mentions. So, the first honorable mention is Wicked Part 1. I mean, like, my friend from Mexico really loves Wicked, and he was actually begging me very much to see this movie and review it. I'll do it anyway, because that's what this channel is for after all, but I was actually even more curious about this movie because of how much my friend really adores it. And I have to say, I can't really say I'm a target audience for this movie, but it does change the fact that I really loved especially the world building. Like, you truly felt like you're transported to an entirely different world of Oz and all that, and the set pieces were excellent, and the whole world of Oz was so immersive, and I'm glad there was little CGI, almost all practical effects and sets and all that, like, and it all felt so massive. Yup, I really loved all that, and I think Ariana Grande as Glinda simply steals it. Like, I mean, yeah, Ariana Grande as Glinda was excellent, and overall, even though you probably know very well that I'm not fond of a take on a tale where by making a villain sympathetic, but then again, like, I'm just basically considering Wicked basically a what-if story, especially that that's the story that really started this trend. Like, it was the beginning, so it was different back then. And also, as I said, I don't really consider it canon to the Wizard of Oz canon, especially that I'm not even so much into the world of Oz overall anyway, but I basically consider, like, what if the Wicked Witch of the West was good all along, while the wizard was the real bad guy. But overall, I really like the songs in this movie, and as I said, the world feels so massive and creatively done, and the set pieces are excellent, and the acting is really good. And I'm invested enough in the story that I'll happily, gladly go and see Wicked for good this year, actually, when it comes out. So, Wicked Part 1, the first one of the honorable mentions. Heretic. And yes, I also really, really love that thriller. Yeah, I don't really consider this a horror. It's very much a thriller. Like the first half especially was super excellent. I really loved how those two Mormon women entered the house of this man who turned out to be an evil serial killer actually, but before that he was like basically asking them those interesting theological challenging questions. Like there was very much questioning their faith, and like that first half of the movie, oh my gosh, was so excellent and so interesting, so engaging, and I really loved all those challenging questions that the man was asking them and basically making them think. Like some people say the movie is pro-religion, some say it's anti-religion, like, but the fact that we're even having this debate further shows how smart this movie really was, because there are so many different interpretations you could go on about it. Then the second half of the movie is where it changed pretty much to a generic thriller, but then again, it was kind of to be expected, because that's generally what happens in the last acts, where the action has to start moving forward, but it still doesn't change the fact that it was a really creative, interesting thriller with some really interesting philosophical challenging questions. Yup. Heretic, really great thriller, and another in the honorable mentions. I'm also really glad that I get to include a Polish movie. I mean, last year I included the Polish movie on my best list, and this year I'm glad to be able to include one on my honorable mentions, and that's Colors of Evil Red. Yep, I really like that Polish mystery thriller. Like this young woman named Monica her dead body gets found at the beach at the beginning of the movie, and then the rest of the movie basically tells two stories. One, how it all came to Monica being murdered, and then Monica's mother, who's a judge actually, and the police basically investigating her murder and how it all led to that. And I really loved how it's told, and I really loved how the movie basically showed us a story, how it all started from Monica's perspective. Basically, it made her death all so much more sad and emotional and all that, and I really liked how it all basically showed on one hand the modern day of investigating her murder, and then a past of how everything led to her murder. And this was all really creatively done, and I really loved all that. And I also loved how basically Monica's mother, basically on one hand she has to obey the law because she technically works for the law, but at the same time because the murder victim is her daughter, it's basically kind of creates a conflict and all that. And the villain, basically an evil serial killer, was really evil and all that. And I also really love the twist at the very end, which is completely unexpected. I mean, my mom, who also later watched the movie, she told me she actually predicted the twist halfway through, which I can't believe. How did she do that? Because for me the twist was completely unexpected, and I heard to a lot of people was, but yep, I'm really glad to include a Polish movie in honorable mentions. If I compare it to last year's Chłopy, which one I think is a better movie, well, this one is certainly far more engaging, entertaining, but I think Chłopy is certainly much more important to the Polish culture, and it's certainly much more, in general, creative movie with its animation, and it's, again, and being based on a book that's very popular in Polish culture. So I guess, Colors of Evil Red is more fun and entertaining and more interesting, but Chłopy is certainly much more important to the overall Polish culture. So if I said which one of these movies you should see, I would probably recommend Chłopy if you truly commend Polish culture, but I think both are really good, interesting movies, and if I had to rewatch either one, it would actually probably be Colors of Evil Red. But I'm really glad I get to include one Polish movie in my honorable mentions. And also White Bird. And White Bird is a really good period piece taking place in World War II. I generally very much tend to really love World War II stories, and this is also technically a sequel to Wonder, because in the movie Wonder there was this boy with this was kind of sick in his face, and then he was bullied, but this movie basically tells a story, this time it's a sequel technically, of his bully whose grandmother, who lived in World War II, basically tells him a story of what it was like when people were hating on other people, and she takes him back in time all the way to World War II. And yep, other than this bully being technically the one who lives in the story, the movie barely has anything to do with Wonder, really, and it could totally work if the whole modern day was removed and all the connections to Wonder, it could totally work this way too. I don't mind either way, whether it's just like a sequel to Wonder or whether it's like, or whether it was just its own movie with all it removed. It works for me either way, but it's basically this World War II period piece. It's about this Jewish French girl who's basically hidden from the Germans during World War II by another family, and then she also struggles to fit in at school and all that, especially that the German soldiers are very much patrolling and are trying to round up all the Jewish kids and all that, and then the family struggles with keeping her hidden and all that. I mean, like, this is a really fascinating, well-crafted World War II period piece, and I really love it. As I just said, I generally do love World War II period pieces, and I think this one is really well done. It's also very emotional, very sad in some ways, and the characters are really great and likable and all that. Like, yep. I really, really love The White Bird, and I think it's a really great World War II period piece, and either as a sequel to Wonder, which technically is, or as a standalone World War II period piece, either way, I think it works great, and I think it's a really good period piece. And the final honorable mention I have for you is Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Yeah, it's probably the most recent movie I actually reviewed on this list, and everything I said in my review pretty much applies here, because I already said I'm really invested at this point in this live-action Sonic universe. I think each movie was better than the previous one. Like, Sonic the Hedgehog 1 was really good, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was even better and such a blast, but now Sonic the Hedgehog 3, I think, was by far the best of them all, and I really love how this movie very much further progressed the story and all that, and in the tradition it introduced Shadow, and it very much done him justice and all that. And I also really love Jim Carrey's performance as Dr. Eggman Robotnik, as well as Dr. Gerald Robotnik. Like, Jim Carrey, in the role of both Robotniks, he was simply stealing the whole thing and all that, and the movie even did have some sad and emotional moments. Yep, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is by far the best of all the three Sonic movies, and all three of them are really good, and it was just blast through and just so much fun. So, these are my honorable mentions. Now, let's get on with an actual best movies of 2024 list. And coming in number 10 is a French movie, The Count of Monte Cristo. Like, I've seen this movie with my family because both my sister and my mom actually have read the book. Like, it's my mom's favorite book and also one of my sister's favorites, and from their saying, this movie very much done the book justice. And because I actually haven't read the book, I want to read it someday, but yep, I really love the story of the movie. The story of the movie is about this young man and then his best friend, but also rival who loves the same woman, with some other men are on a conspiracy and send him to prison away on an isolated island in the middle of the sea in some tower. And then he meets this priest who's imprisoned there with him, who basically tells him about the Templar treasure. And then the young man goes, and after 15 years, he frees himself from jail, and then he finds this Templar treasure and comes back as a rich man, the Count of Monte Cristo, and plans a revenge on his enemies. Yep, this is a really fascinating story, although I do actually think that this probably would even work better in the book format, because from what I'm hearing from both my mom and my sister, that plenty of the things in the books are far longer, like the conversation with the priest in the prison is actually far longer. Apparently takes a couple of chapters, and yeah, I'm not surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised if the conversation in the actual book was so much longer and so much more interesting conversations, but again, there's only so much you can do in the movie. Overall, I really love the movie, and by the way, later Count of Monte Cristo becomes basically no better from his enemies. In some ways, he becomes actually as evil as them. This is not like one of those revenge stories where like a hero goes and kills his enemies and we just meant to cheer for him. No, like this vengeance very much is consuming him, and basically, as I said, turns him into practically as evil as the enemies that he intends to hurt. But it's a really great, fascinating story, and I very much want to read the book at some point. Number 9, and this is Deadpool and Wolverine. Yeah, I've seen plenty of people saying that this movie doesn't have much of the story, that it's just a pure nostalgia fest and all that, and it doesn't require much thinking. Well, yeah, but sometimes those types of movies are literally all you need. Like in a similar case to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, actually. Yeah, this movie is pretty much just to have fun, really, nothing else about this Deadpool and Wolverine and all their interactions, and then going through various different stories from the X-Men comics. I haven't even read the comics, but I could catch plenty of those things from the comics, even though I haven't read the comics and all that, and just filled with so many references to modern pop culture, to modern Disney, to, as I said, the comics, and even to some other movies unrelated to Marvel, like. And that's all this movie needed to be. Just pure fun. Sometimes those types of movies are purely about fun and entertainment and nothing else is literally all you need. Like, yep, I acknowledge, this movie certainly didn't have particularly deep storyline. And it's okay, because it wasn't supposed to. Like, this movie was simply about very much honoring Deadpool and Wolverine and just purely about having fun. And I also really loved the fight scenes in this movie and all that. Like, yep, this movie is just pure fun and joy to watch. Anytime I'm rewatching this movie, I'm just having a smile on my face and a great time. Number 8. And could anyone ever believe that? Because number 8 is Transformers 1. Could anyone ever think that there would be a time in the day where I'm actually putting a Transformers movie on the best of the year movies list? Well, I didn't either, but Transformers 1, it was a really great movie and it impressed me so much with how much fun I had with it. Like, it's basically an origin story about Megatron and Optimus Prime and their friendship and all that, and I really loved it. Like, basically their friendship and how they turned into lifelong enemies is basically what was stealing the whole thing for me. Like, the movie had plenty of spectacular and awesome action scenes, but what really served the movie best and what really was stealing the whole thing for me is just the chemistry and the friendship between Optimus Prime and Megatron. And this was so excellent, and I also really loved the animation of this movie. It was kind of giving me basically a vibes of those like cheesy animated movie from like the 2000s, like from like early 2000s, like Bionicle. And fun fact, as a kid, I was a huge fan of the Bionicle. I used to collect all the Lego figures as well as had all those movies on the VHS. And yes, Transformers 1 was actually kind of giving me a vibes of those like of Bionicle and some other early 2000s animated movies in general. And I also think Sentinel Prime was a really cool villain, and I also really loved that how the movie ended on a very satisfying note while still very much opening doors for the sequels. And I really wish they do continue this animated universe, because I'm really now invested in all the characters and all that, and I wanna see where this is further going. Although, because the movie didn't make so much money, chances of a sequel sadly now seem slim. But at the very least, I'm really happy and glad that they ended it on a satisfying note in the way that at the very end you very much feel fulfilled while still very much open for potential sequels. And one more thing, this should not be, in my opinion, a prequel to the live action movies, because live action movies are trash. They're just pure spectacle, nothing else. But this is good, and in my opinion, this shouldn't be a prequel. It should just basically be like a prequel and a reboot, meaning that it sort of isn't Transformers origin story, but it's a really takes place in an entirely new continuity, and I think that's how it should be. That way, to give the writers complete freedom to create more. And even though, as I said, chances of a sequel are slim, but I'm still slightly holding on to hope. And as I said, I'm glad at the very least the story still ended up on a very satisfying note in a way that it still makes you feel fulfilled at the end. Coming in number 7, and this is the movie that I actually haven't reviewed on this channel yet. I might, but it's Juror number 2, and I really love Clint Eastwood. I think he's a phenomenal director. My favorite movies of his are Unforgiven and Gran Torino, but this one I say it's the best movie of his in a while. I really love how this movie basically explores the American justice system and flaws inside it, and also asks some really interesting challenging questions actually, and I also love how it clearly borrowed some elements from other movies, from other courtroom dramas like 12 Angry Men, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, by the way, and I also really love how, the influence very much clearly is there. It's about this, because in this movie it's about this guy who stands trial because he's been accused of murdering his girlfriend, and then, but he denies it, and then one of the members of the jury, the main character actually then remembers how he basically ran over a deer, but then the more he thinks about it, the more he realizes that he might actually been responsible for that girl's death. And then some really, really interesting things happen, and I probably need to review this movie because the plenty of the things are actually better for a full long review, but this was a really, really fascinating film and was asking really interesting questions like, what exactly is justice? Are justice and the truth the same thing? And all that, like, also, like, it was, the movie was asking really interesting, fascinating, complicated questions, and as I said, probably requires a full review, and also the ending kind of was really interesting actually, and kind of ambiguous, but Juror number 2 is the best movie of Clint Eastwood in a while, and I really had a great time with it. Number 6. Civil War, and I think this is a very important movie in the modern times because United States now is very divided politically. Like, the election obviously was happening, and I already knew that whoever wins, either way, there is gonna be a huge division. Although I already see plenty of people basically cutting off their family members so because they voted for Trump. And I will say this: I don't generally I hate discussing politics on this channel, but I do believe that if you are just cutting off all ties with your friend or family member just because they didn't vote for who you like, that's not cool, and I don't honestly think you're a good person if you truly are cutting off. Again, as I said, I don't care who you vote for, your choice, but all I care is if you're a good person or not. But seriously, I would say this: if you're cutting off a member of your family or a friend all because of their choice in a political candidate, sorry, but that speaks loads about you, not about them. Sorry, my opinion. But yes, this movie is about a civil war, but I want to, in basically the divided states of America. It's kind of like basically this speculative dystopian fiction, and I really loved it. It was so fascinating and all that, and I really love how the movie basically did not take political sides. Like, basically, like, it was basically hard to tell who was whom, really, and I really loved that. It very much worked in the movie's favor, and as a result, I think it could really appeal to anybody of any political spectrum, which is what a movie like that very much should be. And many of the complaints I see about this movie is that there was very little action. I mean, it wasn't for the whole movie, it was mostly at the end of the movie in some moments, but like, a movie does need to have action in order to be great. Like, what really was interesting in this movie is about how those journalists were interacting with the people and all that, as well as traveling through a torn, divided states of America and all that. And the final action scene actually was actually pretty spectacular, but this was a really excellent, fascinating movie, and in some ways also pretty disturbing, because who knows, if people keep on going down the same road of politics as they're really going, this might really sadly end up happening. Let's hope it won't come to that. Number 5. And I'm super glad to say it, but Inside Out 2. Like, I'm glad to be able to include a Pixar movie on this list, because we all know Disney no longer cares for making quality animated movies for the families, but Pixar clearly does. It's just that Disney has them under control, and as a result they aren't really able to do it that easily. But Inside Out 2 is what you get when there is no political messaging or preaching, instead just trying to tell a great story for the whole family to enjoy, and as a result, this is what you get. because I really love the first Inside Out movie. I think it's one of the Pixar's best movies, and I think Inside Out 2 in some ways actually did better than the first. So no, I'm not saying it's better overall, but I'm saying in some ways it's better. It's about how Riley basically is entering her teenage years, and then she's changing her school, and then she and her two friends are going on this hockey camp, and but then she finds out that her two best friends are basically going to another school, and as a result, Riley, instead of hanging out with her friends, she's trying to fit in with the new group. And it's a really compelling story about what type of things we all as teenagers did in fact struggle. Yep, I generally do tend to love teenage stories in general. I mean, like, they're so relatable. And by the way, I actually very much was actually agreeing with Riley's choices in the movie, because basically she was basically looking forward to the future. Like, she was basically like, she knew that she won't really have her friends around in the new school, while this was a group that she was about to have in her school years. So I think her choice was totally valid, and I actually agree with that. But I also really love new emotions and all that, anxiety, nostalgia, envy. Yep, those are some pretty interesting emotions that are very much common in teenagers' lives. So yep, I thought that they were a really nice, welcome addition to the movie. But Inside Out 2 is literally the best Pixar movie I've seen in a while. And I say it's better than Elemental, better than Luca, even better than Soul. It's probably the best Pixar movie ever since Coco. And Coco, by the way, is one of my favorite Pixar movies ever. But I'm glad that this time, finally, after a long while, I was finally able to include a Pixar movie in my best of the year list. Coming in number 4, and this is a movie that I think plenty of people, probably most, haven't actually seen, but this is Cabrini, which is by the same studio that has done Sound of Freedom, and also by the same director, and I really loved Cabrini. It's about this Italian who's coming, this Italian nun who's Saint Francesca Cabrini, who's coming to the United States to fight for the rights of immigrants, mostly Italians, but also the Irish, because in general, Catholic immigrants that were not very well treated in the United States. I mean, not just Catholics, immigrants in general, but she was largely focusing on the Catholics, because Italians and the Irish were very much persecuted, like in the early 40s and all that, when they were coming to the United States. And Mother Cabrini was basically coming to fight for their rights and all that. And I think and I didn't even know much about her before that. I didn't even know she existed. But then I watched this movie, and it was so fascinating to learn so much interesting information about her and all that. And she's basically a patron saint of immigrants. And I heard she's apparently the first Catholic American saint. And yep, it was such a fascinating movie. And seeing all that was so interesting. And it's really a shame that Hollywood very much doesn't want movies like that to be released, all because they probably don't like the political views of the studio that's being released. Even though I think it's a really great and compelling movie. It's pretty comparable to Sound of Freedom. Maybe Sound of Freedom is slightly more important, because maybe Sound of Freedom, I guess, is slightly more important in terms of the message, but Cabrini is still very much a fascinating, compelling story. What's also amazing about it is I don't even think you have to be a Catholic to really appreciate this awesome and compelling, powerful movie. So yes, Cabrini is really excellent, and I really wish more people have seen it. Number 3. And this is the best animated movie of the year, and it's The Wild Robot. Like, The Wild Robot is one of the best animated movies I've seen in a while. It's actually probably also one of the best animated movies of the decade. Like, I mean, the best will always be, for now at least, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, and it doesn't seem anything still comes even close to it, but that one's one of my favorite animated movies ever. But I actually think The Wild Robot might now actually be my close second favorite animated movie. Either that or Suzume, but yep. The Wild Robot is one of the best animated movies I've seen in a long while. And the animation is super gorgeous here, and it just feasts for the eyes. If you've been watching me on this channel, you know I'm very sensitive to beautiful and gorgeous visuals, and I think the Wild Robot very much has them. Like Cam said, the animation is simply beautiful, spectacular, gorgeous, but what really steals this whole movie for me actually though is the story and the characters. And the story is about this robot named Ross who comes to Earth and has a task to raise this baby goose, and then she basically starts forming this strong bond with him, and the story then and also teams up with a fox who on the other hand overcomes his predatory nature and helps her raise this baby goose, and he becomes his father. And yep, it's a really fascinating, compelling story, and then so many interesting things are happening. This is literally one of the best DreamWorks movies I've seen in a while. I mean, like, the best will always be The Prince of Egypt, followed by How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, but I actually think The Wild Robot might actually now be my third favorite DreamWorks movie, because this was a really awesome movie with a really gorgeous animation, really compelling story and characters, and even some interesting themes, including of fear of the unknown, parenthood, as well as letting things go. But yep, this was a really fantastic, powerful movie. People often say that some movies aren't particularly good, standards have lowered. And the best way to check if the movie truly is great or if standards have lowered, the best way is to imagine the movie coming out back in like 2013. And if The Wild Robot came out in 2013, I still very much think it's certainly one of the best DreamWorks movies ever. The Wild Robot, really fantastic animated movie, and possibly the best animated movie since Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, either that or Suzume. Coming number 2, what am I saying? Coming number 2 is Dune Part 2, and I was very much looking forward to this movie ever since Dune Part 1 ended. Plenty of people saying that Dune Part 1 wasn't that great, that they were feeling so unfulfilled at the end of the movie, and I understand where they were coming from. Like, I wasn't surprised because I read the Dune book, so basically the first half is basically like the first half of the book, and it's basically more like a setup than a true payoff, so it's understandable that so many people felt unfulfilled, but Dune Part 2 very much made up for that. And while Dune Part 1 was very much set up and first half of the book, Dune Part 2, on the other hand, is very much a payoff, and a really fantastic payoff at that. I really love the world building of this movie, and also the political scheming and all that. And I mean, there are some changes from the book that I admit I wasn't particularly fond of, but then again, the Lord of the Rings trilogy also very much changed some things from the book, but they're still my most beloved movies ever made. So even though there were quite some changes in Dune Part 2 that honestly I wasn't very fond of, but at the end of the day, sometimes changes are necessary for the sake of the movie format, so I understand that. But I truly think Denis Villeneuve truly cares for the Dune novel, and he totally has done it justice, as I said. And Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides is simply excellent, and as I said, the world building is excellent, and all the politics and all that is interesting, and the themes of the movie are really fascinating. And I've seen some people saying the movie is anti-religion. No, it's not against religion. It's just against more like creating this messiah figure in a human being. That's what the movie is mostly against, which is something Frank Herbert very much was also against. But yes, well, Dune Part 1 was great, but was mostly a setup. Dune Part 2 is a super excellent payoff, and it's honestly one of the best science fiction movies I've seen in a while, and I'm really now looking forward to Dune Messiah. Although, fun fact, while I did read the first Dune book, I actually haven't read Dune Messiah, actually. So, when Dune Messiah does ultimately come out, I'll be actually watching it completely blind, because I read the first Dune book, which is fantastic, but I haven't actually read Dune Messiah. But Dune Part 2 was super excellent, and an excellent payoff. And as I said, there were some changes from the book that I really wasn't happy about, mostly involving the little sister of Paul Atreides, because, fun fact, in the book she's actually already born, so I admit, I really wish that the movie kept her being born, because those are some of the most fascinating things in the Dune novel, but overall, excellent adaptation that I think mostly does justice to Frank Herbert's work. And at number 1, my favorite movie of 2024 is Nosferatu. And I think it was pretty much predictable that this was coming, because fun fact about Dune Part 2 though, because I was actually constantly comparing every single movie that I really loved this year to actually Dune Part 2, and I was saying, is it better than Dune Part 2? Is it better than Dune Part 2? But none of the movies really did that until Nosferatu, and yep, I think this movie is super excellent, and it's literally one of the scariest horror movies I've seen in a while, because one of the things I don't like about most horror movies is that many horror movies I don't think really are particularly scary, but this truly was scary very much, and it did truly make me feel unsettled and really nervous, and I was constantly on the edge of my seat for all time, and I also really loved the visuals of this movie, the cinematography, like Robert Eggers excels and all that, and all the historical authenticity that Robert Eggers very much went through to film this movie. I mean, Robert Eggers in general excels when it comes to historical authenticity, and in Nosferatu it was very much showing. And also, this movie is a true horror masterpiece and a true marvel of cinema in a recent while. Do I prefer Nosferatu or The Northman? This is actually hard to say. I'll probably have to rewatch Nosferatu a couple of more times before I make a decision which movie I prefer, but it does change the fact that I really, really loved Nosferatu, and I think I actually even loved it more than I loved the original from 1922, which says a lot, because I love that movie as well. I also love the look of Count Orlok, and even though I already said in my review that I don't think he looked particularly scary, but again, because of the many monsters I've seen in movies, it's hard to scare me with the look alone at this point, but he still looked excellent, which is what matters. And I also think that Lily Rose Depp as Ellen Hutter was super excellent too, but really Bill Skarsgård was stealing the whole thing as Count Orlok. Like, yep, Nosferatu is literally one of the best. It's probably the greatest horror movie I've seen in a very long time. Far better than Abigail, much better than It. Yep. This was a truly, truly phenomenal movie, and now I literally think that Robert Eggers should join the list of Hollywood saviors together with Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino, because this guy truly cares for quality filmmaking, and I'm really hoping, and I'm really now curious what next he brings to the table, because he only gains more and more respect from me from each movie he directs. So, Nosferatu at number 1. So, ladies and gentlemen, here are my 10 best movies of 2024, and also what I really found interesting, that this is the first time in a long while where my 2 most anticipated movies ended up also being my 2 favorites of the year, because if you see my most anticipated movie of 2024 from like last year, you'll see that Nosferatu and Dune Part 2 were both number 2 and 1. I mean, Nosferatu was number 2, while Dune Part 2 was number 1 as my most anticipated, and while they are reversed their spots, it still doesn't change the fact that this is the very first time in a long while, where a movie that I was most anticipating ended up being my favorite of the year too, because in 2021, I remember my most anticipated movie of 2022, although I didn't have a YouTube channel back then yet, but yes, in 2021, my most anticipated movie of 2022 was Matt Reeves' Batman. And while I did end up enjoying the movie, and it did end up being on the list, it certainly was nowhere near in the top spot, and because I've now seen even more movies of 2022, it's now even lower on the list. And then my most anticipated movie of 2023 was Ridley Scott's Napoleon, and that movie only ended up being in honorable mentions, but looking back, I think even then I was being way too generous on this movie. But I'm really happy that this time my 2 most anticipated movie of the year also very much ended up being in my top 2 spots of best movies on the list. So again, here are my best movies of 2024. And thank you guys for checking out this video. What are your favorite movies of 2024? And thank you very much for checking this video out. Press the like button, please subscribe to the channel. Again, let me know your favorite movies of 2024 and talk to you soon. Bye!